I just got off a 15-hour shift, so I think if there's anyone qualified to talk on this subject at length, it's me. The good news is that brainwashing doesn't actually exist in real life. We never found a way to make it work. From a storytelling perspective, this makes things both easy and difficult for the writers of the Outlast Trials. It's easy because it gives them this kind of creative freedom, because with no precedent or basis for real-life brainwashing, they aren't forced to adhere to any rules or expectations. They can create their own set of rules about how their system of brainwashing works. That's nice, but it's also hard, because whatever set of rules they come up with, they need to be convincing enough that we players are able to buy into them, at least somewhat. Because even though we understand that brainwashing isn't real, there's only so much of our disbelief which we are willing to suspend, so the writers have to make sure there's some level of plausibility to the game's depiction of brainwashing. A basic, consistent logic to follow at minimum. So what, according to the universe of the Outlast Trials, does it take to brainwash someone? Some people might say charisma. The concept of charisma is everywhere in this game, and though I think its importance, its connection to brainwashing, is obvious to some people, for a lot of others, it trips them up. Dr. Easterman is obsessed with charisma. He's always going on about how he needs his prime assets to be charismatic. Charisma is power. Charisma is the hand which molds the clay. Maybe you don't even know what charisma means. That's nothing to be ashamed of. This word gets thrown around so much in this game that it's starting to feel like it's losing its meaning, especially when what Easterman calls charismatic isn't exactly what everybody would agree with. For a quick and dirty definition, just think of charisma as a personality characteristic that makes you seem to other people to be likable, influential, smart, inviting. If you're charismatic, not only will people admire you, but they will listen to you, and most importantly, they will do what you say. Maybe you already know where I'm going with this. In the context of 20th century history, this was a big deal. What happened only a couple decades prior to the onset of the Outlast Trials? World War II. We had soldiers, scientists, and very regular, ordinary citizens being either passively complicit or fully engaged participants in these very terrible atrocities, war crimes on magnitudes never before seen in all of human history. A lot of people started asking, in regular life but also in research, what made people do all that? Question taken literally, it was leaders, authorities, politicians, charismatic ones crucially. They told their subjects to go fight these wars and do bad things, and because of their charisma, they were influential enough to be listened to. This is obviously a massive oversimplification, but it captures the general idea. And I think it is the idea Easterman is in love with, because while most people, post-World War II, are studying these extremes of unquestioning obedience so we can learn how to avoid them, Easterman is trying to learn how to repeat them. He sees this behavior as something to control and replicate. Because I said earlier that brainwashing doesn't exist in real life, but these examples from real history are the closest we're likely to get. It's not exactly perfect, but what is brainwashing if not forsaking your own values and beliefs for those of your controllers? And this is an even more insidious form compared to most fictional concepts of brainwashing, because here, the victims are willingly doing away with concern for their own lives, all for the benefit of the charismatic leader. Outlast has been interested in this idea even before Trials. Outlast 2 was based on the real-world Jonestown incident, where this very charismatic cult leader, Jim Jones, led 900-something people to all drink this poisoned flavor aid, which they knew would cause their deaths. Hence the mistaken euphemism we have nowadays, drinking the Kool-Aid, which is effectively meant to make fun of hopelessly brainwashed buffoons. Is that it then? In the Outlast universe, if you're charismatic enough, if you can reach enough people, if you can slowly plant the seeds of your influence in their minds over time, then you can convince them to do, think, and feel whatever you say? Actually, I think this is not the case. This is not what the game is trying to tell us. Charisma isn't the full story, at the very least. Because remember who the principal charismatic figures are supposed to be, the prime assets. And Easterman is not trying to get us reagents to fall under their charismatic sway. Everything we do in the trials is intended as rage bait for them. We are defying and angering the prime assets. We are foiling their dastardly plans at every turn. Most importantly, we are being taught to oppose their values and desires. I think this is another reason for all the confusion over Easterman's charisma fetish, because really, what is the charisma there for if we're not even supposed to learn from it, or fall for it, or anything? They're just charismatic for no reason? Okay. Also not true. Now we have to remember Easterman's initial philosophy behind the trials design. There was a past version of the trials which we never got to play because we reagents weren't even present. This rendition was known as Lathe 1. Easterman only had the prime assets and the X-Pop, and though we don't know much about how Lathe 1 exactly worked, it's safe to assume that the X-Pop were meant to fall under the charismatic sway of the primes. To some extent, this looks like it worked. In the modern version of the Trials, Lathe 2, which we're now playing, we reagents get to see that the X-Pop are still parroting the prime assets' voice lines and values. But is it then the case that the X-Pop are so devoted to the primes that that's the reason they're killing us, to please the primes? No, because I think this relationship, this association, is muddied by the X-Pop's overwhelming fear of Murkoff's doctors and scientists instead.
The doctor said that I had to!
If you make the white coats unhappy, they hurt you.
We can't really attribute the X-Pop's eagerness to kill us to the charisma of the primes, because sure, you can make someone do anything you say, but you can't really call it brainwashing if the impetus for their obedience was you telling them, do this thing for me or we will torture you to death. In general, the X-Pop are far more motivated by fear of punishment by Murkoff's scientists and doctors, rather than some kind of unfailing devotion toward the primes. This makes them lousy brainwashing candidates. The X-Pop can be taught to kill, but very little else. They're like blunt objects in that regard. They will swing at anything you tell them to, but it's not Murkoff's primary goal to produce these dumb, violent, indiscriminate murderers. What they want out of the therapy is reborn sleeper agents. They want us capable of discreetly carrying out very specific sets of instructions without us even being conscious of our actions or involvement. If that wasn't a tall enough order, they also want to control us from a distance, selectively wipe our memory of our brainwashed actions completely, and then seamlessly reset us back to normal, presentable default human mode after we've committed whatever atrocity they wanted of us. This is an even more powerful form of brainwashing than we see in most media depictions. We're not spiral-eyed zombies, we are smart and capable and dangerous. So the next important question to answer is, how is this difference of outcome achieved? Murkoff must treat us reagents differently than the X-Pop so that we come out different. At first glance, it looks like we too are motivated by fear. We're only completing Murkoff's trials in order to avoid dismemberment and death. But I think there are a few key differences here. The source of fear has changed, and this is a big thing. Mostly, we're scared of being killed by the X-Pop and the primes. Though we can also be punished by the doctors and scientists, this is not the foremost danger. That makes it harder for us to hate the doctors directly the way the X-Pop do. Our hate and fear is transferred onto the X-Pop and the primes, and we flee to the doctors for safety and for guidance. Secondly, as I hinted at earlier, we are not meant to be swooned by the charismatic primes. In fact, and this is probably the boldest and most surprising claim I'm going to make in this video, I think we are meant to be immune to their charisma. I think the presence of charismatic primes, whose goals are opposed to the lessons Easterman is trying to instill within us, acts as this kind of provision of ideological immunity. Why? Because the unspoken open secret of the Sinyala facility is that the true god of charisma is Dr. Easterman himself. It's his demands, his decisions, which are the only ones which matter. That's all the ideology we need, and we need to be safeguarded from all other filthy ideas so that we will trust him and him alone. And he is so charismatic, isn't he? He has the best voice lines in the game, he has the most voice lines in the game, they're the most and they're the best. And no doubt Easterman's charisma is a huge facilitator of our obedience towards him. There's a running joke in the Outlast community where we all act like we're completely brainwashed by Dr. Easterman. We're so eager to do anything and everything he asks, all we want is to please him, we want to be his how high. This is why I think it's a fruitless exercise to try and make sense of the lessons we're being taught in the trials, and I think this is another big pain point when it comes to people's confusion. Guys, don't worry about it. Don't try to make sense of the lessons in the trials, because there's no sense to be made. Murkoff isn't really even trying to convince us of any ideology at all. All that's really happening is they're helping us get accustomed to doing horrible things, because that's what we'll be doing as Murkoff's reborn agents. They tell us, kill and torture and kidnap these fellows, and don't think about it. Because our role as reagents is to be unquestioning children. It doesn't matter why Easterman is telling us to do what we do, it doesn't matter what ideology underlies it, we just need to do it because he said so. And that's such an easy way to live, isn't it? And it's a most opportune ease, one which comes to us in a context of extreme stress, extreme trauma, extreme psychological turmoil. We're so mentally fried and numb and strung out, we want easy answers. We want someone godlike in their omniscience to come along and tell us exactly what to do. That's Easterman. As well, our obedience is ferried along by the impossible, nonsensical nature of the choices presented to us in the trials, which I just touched on. Because what are the actual possible outcomes? If we lose, Coyle continues to get off on torturing the snitch. If we win, the snitch dies a horrible death by electrocution. If we lose, the mannequin children continue to run around murdering adults. If we win, the mannequin children die in a meat grinder. What? That's why it's funny when people try to delineate the trials by a good guy versus bad guy kind of framework. Wait, I thought we reagents were the good guys. Why are we the ones killing these innocent people then? Why are the bad guys mad at us for it? Killing's supposed to be their thing. You're telling me they're not happy with us? It's hard to get out of this conventional way of thinking, but we have to in order to understand. Because what we reagents are really being taught is that there is no such thing as good choices. The only choices that matter are the ones that allow us to survive another day. Morality doesn't even factor in, it doesn't even exist. If that's true, if this really is all arbitrary, then that means that what we're doing isn't bad or wrong or evil. This mindset allows us to do anything, commit any crime, any transgression. If you're struggling to buy into any piece of this whole train of logic I've taken us on, that's okay. Because remember what I said at the beginning of this video, we're talking about a video game here with its own fictional interpretation of how brainwashing might work. Not only that, I'm putting forth my own understanding of it. I could be completely off the mark. I've gone through like 12 different cycles of jotting down my thoughts and deleting and writing and deleting because I'm finding it really difficult to verbally pinpoint exactly a mechanism of brainwashing Easterman is going for. The writers at Red Barrels themselves might not even have any coherent or easily explicable way of looking at it. They could have just thrown a bunch of rough approximations of brainwashing ideas in there, shrugged their shoulders and said, well, brainwashing doesn't exist anyways, we don't have to make our version of it make perfect sense. Meaning, I could be trying to map ideas onto an intent that never existed to begin with. I don't think this is the case, but I don't know. Who can know? Who can say? Concession side, I now want to talk about the final part of the brainwashing process, the rebirth trial, which is this kind of finalizing ritual sealing the functionality of the trigger phrase within us. After we're reborn, anytime we hear anyone say the phrase spider eye lamb, we go into activated sleeper agent mode. It's unclear how I'm just the goat, by the way. Holy sh. Okay, sorry. Tell place. It's unclear how Murkoff exactly controls us in this sleeper agent state. In a lot of the rebirth endings and newspapers, it's suggested that prior to our activation, we're gently guided towards some area of political significance where our intended victims are gathered or waiting or passing by, and once we get triggered, we basically just go berserk and kill anyone in sight, and hopefully that includes the target. Knoth's trigger is tested this way in a motel room with a so-called loose woman. He kills her upon activation. In the Congo ending, our captor mistakenly says our trigger phrase, spider eye lamb. And then against all odds in a hopeless situation, we just brutally murder everyone around us with our bare hands. That's super cool, but it is a much less sophisticated version of brainwashing than I described earlier. That's okay, because there is evidence of much variation in complexity of the tasks we reborn agents carry out. In the Beijing ending, we can't say at what precise point our sleeper agent was activated in the process of this honeypot scheme. Did we just happen to acquire work as a prostitute or escort, and then Murkoff exercised immense patience in waiting for the right time, the right victim to capitalize upon? I think this is unlikely. Because I feel like it must have been the decisions of Murkoff themselves when it comes to deciding which agent to send to which part of the world. We ended up all the way in China, bruh. That had to be by Murkoff's orchestration. They wanted us to kill this scientist to disrupt this nuclear weapons research from the start. But what's hard to imagine is how Murkoff would exactly get us in this situation. Because from the evidence documents detailing Clyde Perry's surveillance of reborn agents, it is very much apparent that reborn agents do not know they are agents at all, which is the literal definition of a sleeper agent, but I'm saying it outright because maybe not everyone knows that. So how would Murkoff order this reagent to go to China to work as an escort to bait this specific scientist into soliciting their services? Without splitting hairs and getting into a bunch of speculative theories on how this one situation could have been orchestrated, I want to broadly conclude that the spider eye lamb trigger phrase produced some notably long and complicated series of activated actions which were not simply kill whatever people are in front of you right now. Smuggling Franco's poison drugs, offering them to the scientist while also having the scrutiny to not ingest them themselves, then falling asleep peacefully and unsuspiciously beside the scientist after the deed is done. To carry all this out and potentially more beforehand in the activated state reflects an impressive capacity for specific behavioral control, that is to say, brainwashing. As a quick aside, I want to return to what I said earlier. I said that the lessons in the trials don't actually matter, and it's just a matter of learning to do what Easterman says. Let me retract that a little bit. A lot of rebirth endings show to us that we replicate the exact actions we performed within certain trials during our activated state. Like when the newspaper reports how we murdered this Arno fellow, it's suggested that we sawed off his legs and hung him in the crucifixion pose just like we do in Cleanse the Orphans. Similarly, we do the same kind of kidnapping which we see in trials like Gather the Children of God or Punish the Miscreants. So it's apparent that we are at least executing some very copy-paste, rote memorization learning from the trials. Now back on track, how and why is it this one phrase, spider eye lamb, which causes us to go into our activated state? You have probably seen clips of badly traumatized veterans. They're sitting there quietly, and then they're suddenly handed a part of their military uniform. It could be a cap, just an innocent cap, and that's all it takes. They suffer a panic attack from this, they start shaking uncontrollably, and they lose all grip on reality. Hence why this is known as being triggered or having your trauma triggered. Something akin to this is supposed to happen to us reborn agents due to all the trauma we absorb in the trials, and that's why it's called the trigger phrase. That's what we're activated by. This phrase, spider eye lamb, is meant to strongly and immediately reactivate our buried memories of the trials. The difference from reality is that our triggered panic attack is controlled and useful to Murkoff in the ways I just described. But why these words? Why this phrase specifically? I think the answer is not that clear, because it isn't all that well done. Obviously, in the Rebirth trial, we tune the radios to play the words spider, eye, and lamb, just repeating to us over and over, and so this is intentionally creating a trigger. That's why I call it a ritual. But I want to argue that we encounter so many kinds of repeated stimuli within all the trials prior to Rebirth. I think hearing someone talk about wanting pistachios would be more likely to trigger our activated state than spider eye lamb. So I'm not asking rhetorically, why is spider eye lamb so special? I feel like these three words, as well as imagery of them, should have been much more ubiquitous throughout all the trials, and even in the sleep room maybe. There was an opportunity to do this with the key symbols we see so often in the objectives. You know, instead of heart, club, spade, diamond, and so on, I would have thought there would be a spider symbol and a lamb symbol. There's an eye symbol already, so there's that, but eyes have always been everywhere in Outlast imagery and symbolism anyways for other reasons. I just feel like the trigger words haven't had enough meaning to us reagents throughout the trials experience to serve as the trigger. I mean, if you're paying very close attention, you will notice that a not insignificant amount of voice lines in the game do reference spiders, eyes, and lambs. Gooseberry mentions how all her little lambs have gone astray, an idle grunt describes Otto and Aurora as a spider the size of a horse. The Berserker tells us to just shake his web just a little bit. Easterman's placeholder MK Challenge introduction speeches tell us things like, "We are the spider, not the fly. You are the shepherd who would save the poor little lambs from mother. You are the eye, all-seeing, all-powerful." Considering that there are thousands of voice lines in the game, these are a bit more on the subtle side and they're easy to miss. Is that intentional? Maybe the writers just didn't want to smack us in the face with the presence of the trigger phrase components. I don't know. I don't think this is the situation where you want subtlety, but I could be unwise. Well, that's more or less my one and only criticism. Last thing, I want to loop back and clarify one last potential point of confusion. It's about the charisma thing. A lot of people wonder how Franco and Otto and Aurora could be considered charismatic. For Otto, it's easy enough to say he's got the politician's persuasive rhetoric, which we can see in KTP, and Aurora is extremely smart, and so she's got that kind of intellectual allure, I guess. But Franco is irredeemably repulsive. I want to say all three of them are irredeemably repulsive, honestly. What kind of charisma does Easterman see in them? I want to say, don't worry about it. I think our definition of charisma isn't necessarily compromised by this confusion, because remember that charisma isn't even that important anymore after Lathe 1. Franco and Otto and Aurora joined the trials after Lathe 2 already begun, at which point us reagents aren't meant to be swayed by the Prime's charisma. Or so my theory goes at least, which I'm beginning to doubt. This is disgusting. Well, yes, Easterman does describe these newest primes as charismatic still, and maybe that is confusing, and yes, the X-Pops still need charismatic primes to look up to and follow, but fear-motivated obedience can still do a lot of the heavy lifting in its absence. I should also mention one more thing which might make our confusion worse, but might make it better. It's the fact that Easterman himself often wildly mistakes the meaning of his own scientific results. I've mentioned this before in other videos, but it's this running joke, this persistent irony where, Easterman will say, "Oh, the Skinnerman, that doesn't matter, that's a meaningless side effect of the research," when we players are meant to understand that the Skinnerman is probably the single most important product of the trials. And he'll write that he expects the sleep screamers to have a calming effect on us reagents, when in reality all they do is piss us off and stress us out. Now, it's very difficult to treat with Easterman's unreliability because, what, are we just going to be conveniently selective about it, and in instances where we cannot understand what he's saying, we just conclude that, okay, Easterman saying this is just him being blatantly wrong, and in every other situation where we can understand him, we say, okay, Easterman is being normal and correct here. Because that feels like a very cheap and unsound way to draw our conclusions. Maybe I'm putting way too much stock into this one tiny detail. I don't want to say that Easterman is flat out wrong when he calls Franco charismatic, but I don't see what he's seeing. Yes, Franco is funny and he has a great way with words, but we know that by all accounts, nobody in the real world liked him. Nobody in the trials likes him either. Any charisma he has is achieved by proxy. People follow him because he has money and drugs. Easterman, is that all it takes for you? That qualifies as charisma? Long tangent to end the video, thanks for listening, and I'm fried. Actually, I put this whole video together because there were a ton of things regarding the brainwashing process which I thought were totally incomprehensible, but now that I put so much thought into it, I'm realizing that the whole thing looks surprisingly coherent. Like, it actually makes sense to me now. I'm only hoping you can say the same. Did I explain it well to you guys? Were there any vast leaps in logic? I hope not. I feel like there was more I wanted to say. I mean, there's always more I want to say, like, whatever, bruh. I'll just put an addendum in the description with a pinned comment. It's just that I'm always trying to leave no stone unturned, but 1700 years ago, someone's presently dead wife was telling her the woman is stoned, the girl is... Holy s***, what is happening? All again.